I was here last year, very much enjoyed being here last year. Maybe some of you were here last year when I was. And we talked about the quilts that are in the collection of the museum, which was really a treat, wasn't it? It was lovely. Today, I thought you might be interested in my Redwork collection of quilts. I don't know, I don't know if I should ask, no, I'm just going to tell you. I was going to say, is there anybody who doesn't know what Redwork is? But there probably is. So let me tell you about Redwork. And Redwork is red and white, with red being the embroidery on a white background. And I'll just give you one tiny little piece to begin with. And it's been around for a really long time. The early, like 1820s was sort of a beginning time period of Redwork, but it wasn't as popular as it became as time went on. But let me just show you a couple of blocks first to get us started. This is Redwork, and you can see that it's red embroidery on a white or cream. This is a muslin fabric, white or cream background, and there are all different kinds of designs to look at, all different kinds of designs to look at. These are just a few. I've got a bunch here to show you, but this is Redwork, and this was how it started, with a piece of fabric and a stamped design to embroider with embroidery floss. And so I've got a hoop, and I can put this here. It's not windy until I put these things down, and then all of a sudden it's windy.
Why don't you pass them out?
Well, those don't really need to be passed out. We'll put us another place. But here's how it started, and I'm going to have to get closer for you to see that. But this is the idea. It's a design that's stamped on a piece of fabric. And if you look at the subject matter, this is a pretty old one, actually. Although now we are copying these designs, so you could find this design anytime after the time period of probably the early 1900s, I would say. But that's how it started. It started as a stamp design, and we'll talk a little bit about how that got stamped on there. There were all kinds of different ways to do that, and so that's how it started. And then you would get some embroidery floss, and today I don't have the old-fashioned kind of embroidery floss with me, but it's still the same idea. This is embroidery floss, and it's got strands in it, and it's usually got 6 strands. So if you look at this, and this is a ball of it, you can get it in sort of a looped form, but this is a ball of embroidery floss, so it's a little bit more in here. And so you could actually separate strands. And again, I've got to get closer. Very awesome, that's right.
Yep.
Wearing my mask. So there are. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Hold your breath a minute.
You use
You
2
see
or
the
3
strands?
strands.
Yes.
You use 2 or 3.
Yes.
Whatever.
Sometimes I use 2, and sometimes I use 3.
Is that for like
what
the
about
thickness
you?
and shaping
Yes,
of the
yes. If
pattern?
you look.
Yeah, I'm familiar
can you
with
see
the
okay.
thread, yeah.
So when you use 2 strands, you're getting a thinner, pattern, really thinner line on the pattern. And when you use 3 strands, you're getting a little bit more. And honestly, in my case, I think it depends on what I want it to look like, how I want it to look. Do I want it to be a sort of a fat line, or do I want it to be a thin line? But for somebody like you guys, have you ever embroidered? And I will say, I'm gonna say that in probably early 1900, a couple of years before you were born, in early 1900, boys did a lot of embroidery. And even in the 1920s and the 1930s, it was still a popular thing to have a boy do embroidery. Why? Because they didn't want them running around and getting everything all mixed up, and they wanted them to sit quietly on the porch and embroider. And I can tell you, I have done this lecture before in front of a group with several men in it, and there almost every time I do it, some man comes up to me and says, when I was a little boy, I had to embroider something. It was considered something to quiet them down so that they wouldn't be running around all day. Sad to say. Nobody's made you embroider yet.
Not happening.
But
I just lighted them.
and this is old for a lot of people who probably don't even know who President Eisenhower was. Does that name ring a bell to some people? President Eisenhower did embroidery as a young boy. That was something that he actually enjoyed. He did embroidery.
You mean Ike?
Ike. I do mean Ike. I like Ike. Did you like Ike?
I like Ike.
Yes, he did. And that was something that was well known at the time. And of course, he was a famous general in the army. So it was a manly thing back then. Okay, so that's the basic. Oh, and let me show you this, because stitching was pretty simple. There weren't a lot of fancy stitches. And there were two main stitches, and you're going to see them along here when we look at things. And one stitch was called a stem stitch, and the other stitch was called a back stitch. And for a lot of you people who already have done embroidery, do you think there's much difference in a stem stitch and a back stitch? There is. It's not a huge difference, but when you do a stem stitch, you hold the thread over to one side and you make a little stitch and pull it. And don't knot it like this. I'll be gentle. And pull it, and then your stitch gets sort of, what do I want to say, not crooked, but
It kind of doubles up.
yeah, it kind of doubles up. Good, thank you. That's good. Because it does. That's the stem stitch. So you're holding the thread to one side to do that. And then the back stitch is very close in the finished product, but with the back stitch, you have your thread ahead of you and you stitch right behind where the thread comes up. You don't hold the thread to one side. You stitch where the thread comes up right behind it, and that makes a little bit straighter stitch. The stem stitch, I like to use it for flowers, for you know, stems on the flowers, which is big work, that's me. But the back stitch comes right behind where the stitch comes up. So it's a little bit different. And there's another name, and this is sort of interesting as well, and how this all began in the United States. It was popular in England many, many years before it became popular in the United States. And what happened was in 1876, we had a centennial exhibition, and it was held in Philadelphia. And it was a big exhibition where people from all different countries came and had booths and set up a booth and showed people what their country was known for. And England set up a booth, and the people who came from England were from the Kensington School for Girls. And that was a needlework school where girls learned how to really do embroidery and needlework of all kinds to repair some of the items that were becoming too old and having problems. And so this needlework school for girls, interestingly enough, was run by Queen Victoria's daughter. So that was a very popular thing to do, and the girls came over and brought the needlework, and the needlework had a lot of embroidery involved with it, and people were enamored of this embroidery from the United States. They loved it. And we had other countries bringing other things, and one popular one was Japan, when Japan brought their pictures of vases and fans. Vases and fans became somehow very popular. So the two started to get together, and I didn't bring a crazy quilt because I think most of you probably know what a crazy quilt looks like, but that was the beginning. Crazy quilts were very popular, and a crazy quilt was a bunch of patches of different fabrics that had all kinds of embroidery on it, and the embroidery became very intricate, very involved, thanks to this Kensington School for Girls who showed people all these different ways to embroider. And so that was popular in the 1870s. And then at some point after that, the redwork became a popular thing to do. And I suppose after you've done all this very, very fancy embroidery, and it takes sometimes a whole lifetime to make a quilt that was a crazy quilt, perhaps somebody said, I think I'm just going to use one color. I think I'm just going to do one thing. You know, I don't really know how it changed. They don't seem to be able to tell you how it changed. But it did change. But the interesting thing, I talked about the stem stitch and I talked about the back stitch. So the stem stitch was called the Kensington stitch. And I don't know if you've heard it called the Kensington stitch in your lifetime, but if you look at some of the older books, they would talk about the Kensington stitch, and that was actually the stem stitch, but it came from the Kensington School for Girls. That's where that name came from. So it became interesting. And so there are blocks I'm going to show you, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how the pattern got onto the block. I'm trying to put this in, because I know it's going to blow away if I don't do it. Okay. The red was very popular because red color was made in Turkey, and it was often called Turkey red. So you would call the red thread and the red colored fabric, by the way, Turkey red. Red thread and red colored fabric were both called Turkey red because they were made in Turkey. They were made in Turkey, and it was a very involved process, a very, very long involved process that they only knew how to do. And the neat thing about it was very color fast. So that's why it was red thread as opposed to something else. It was very color fast. And this is an example of the Turkey red. And there are a lot of things that were made before quilts. They weren't putting it into quilts right away. They were making smaller items. This one, oh, he's ready. Thank you. He's ready to hold it around. This one.
I thought he couldn't see it.
No, he's ready to pass it around and let people look. But thank you. And that says around the mulberry bush, which was a children's rhyme years ago. Remember rhyming around the mulberry bush? Now, I'm not sure what that item is, but I think it might be called a splasher. The reason I'm not sure is because a splasher was something when you had a pitcher of water and a bowl to wash yourself in on a stand. Remember, we're talking in the 1800s. There was a stand with a pitcher of water and a bowl. And so you would be splashing, and they would have something hanging up behind it on the wall to protect the wall. And so they called them splashers. And the only problem I have with that is, in general, a splasher had water elements embroidered on it. That does not. But I suppose, I'm quite sure, not everybody embroidered some water-themed things. But you did see a lot with fish and water and things like that on the splashes. But the thing that makes me think it might be is it's hemmed, it's the right size, to be something on the wall, to be sitting against the wall, so I think it might have been considered a splasher. And with that red thread, it didn't run, it really was very color safe. Now, just in case you're thinking this is turkey red right now, it's not, and let me tell you, this can run. And what we suggest, which is a pain to do, but what we suggest is to take your embroidery floss as is in your, usually it's in a looped kind of thing, but just sit it in a bowl of hot water and let it sort of, rest, and you could put a little salt in the water. Salt keeps things from running sometimes. I won't promise that all this does. But in general, right now, red embroidery floss can run. So that's why they used it back then. Now we're using it because they used it and it looked good. And
Why
also,
would it have not run then?
because that was turkey red. It was actual thread
From
color that
Turkey?
was from Turkey, right. It was
Okay.
made in Turkey, it was from Turkey, it was a process that really was very color fast. And now we just have cheap old stuff.
But can you still obtain that turkey red floss? Or
I don't
thread from,
I don't honestly know, certainly
Bet
not
you
easily.
could.
Not,
Yeah.
maybe if you contacted somebody who, I don't know. But as far as I know, we use DMC pretty much
Right.
exclusively, and that does run.
yes.
So, we're sort of slaves to that. Another thing that didn't run was blue. They were able to have a blue dye. And so a blue dye thread also didn't run. And so we see blue as well as red when we're talking about red work. It really can be blue too. Now, red work and blue work are sort of the same. Black work is a whole different type of embroidery. So if this was done this way in black, then it's not considered black work. It's considered like a red work style in black thread. Because black work, and I don't have a lot of history on black work is a whole different process of making something with black. Now, the interesting thing about this, and Dan can hold this up and send it around, and it has a companion, and I put this in the corner because very often cherubs were used for children, and these are children's pillow covers. Now, do you see, hold with me, okay. Do you see they're very much companions here? And I have some cherubs over here too, in the red, so that you can see that would probably have been something for a child as well. But angels, cherubs for children, that was often the case. And these are pillow covers. They are finished. They are not pillowcases. And I personally like this idea. You put the pillows on the bed, and then you just lay this on top of it. You don't have to put a pillowcase in, a pillow in a pillowcase. You just lay this on top. I think it's a perfectly great idea. So these were often just laid on top in the beds. And they're very pretty things, and done pretty much with that Kensington stitch or the bits. And we do have pillowcases, so I've got a few things to just show you what was
Pass
done.
it around.
And these are all old. These are all probably from around 1900, early 1900. I don't have anything probably from 1800, but I do have, honey, you've got to move because there's a camera there. And so this is a pillowcase, and probably upside down, is it? Yes. And so this is just a beautifully done pillowcase because we have some lovely crocheted edge on here. And so now I have to pay attention. Okay, but these are the kinds of blocks, and you can hold this block, this around, I've got another one. These are the kinds of blocks that you would probably have seen in that time period. Here's another pillowcase. And I have this to show you. I pinned this on to show you how many times we replicate things. So this pillowcase, this is probably, I don't know, time period wise, if this is newer and this is older. This, I think, is older simply because it's a very flimsy fabric, and in the early 1900s we had very flimsy fabric. But look it's the same design, exactly. We keep using these designs over and over and over. It's the same design. And so I believe the small square was the older one, and this is a little bit newer. I would say the pillowcase is probably from the 1930s, maybe the 1920s. But it shows how many times we use the same designs over and over and over. And the interesting thing, since there is this here, it's also called a penny square. So if you've heard Redwork, that's really a more contemporary name for what they used to call penny squares. And why did they call them penny squares? Because for 1 penny, you could not only buy the stamped square, you could also get enough embroidery floss to embroider that square. So for 1 penny, and we're talking again early 1900s now, penny squares were a very popular thing to do. And here are 2 more pillow covers. And this time we've got good morning, and you can have good morning. I'm going to have good night. There we go. Okay. So, these again, notice you just put them on top of the pillow. You didn't have to put the pillow inside. I just love the idea. I'm crazy. But, so good morning and good night were very often popular. And I've seen it often in German. I don't know why it was so popular in German, but Guten Morgen and Guten, what's night? I don't know. Not. Oh, yes, I do know. Thank you. I've seen that very, very often. I've seen that written down. So those are popular pillow covers. And then another popular thing that they did with these, and these are newer. These are not old, but you would have embroidered linens. These are towels, linen towels, and it tells you what to do with the towels. Do you notice? In case you didn't know what to do with your towel, you could dry glasses, and you could dry china with your towels. So we have a towel to dry china, and a towel to dry glasses. Isn't that interesting? And these are newer. These are not super old, although they're not super new. We've got some soiling on them that hasn't come out. So these are something that I now this is actually quite old. And this is a shoe bag to keep your shoes clean. And look at the beautiful embroidery. And this is old. This is quite old because we've got the high boot there, high shoe. And I believe that was of the time period.
And people used to have smaller feet.
They certainly did. Look at this.
They did.
Look at this. And they did have smaller feet, you know. Well, they were smaller all the way around. People were much smaller in every way. In every way. We are a large group of people. But this is really neat. And see, there's little hangers, so it could be hung someplace. And then there are slips for your shoes. This would hold 2 pairs of shoes. And then this lovely, sweet little thing. Sweet little bib. And it was meant to be a bib because look at the design. This has a design in the fabric. I'll pass it around when I'm done. And you can look at it, because it's just a sweet thing, isn't it? It's just lovely.
The cloth
It's
it's
lovely.
done on, it's
Yes, but, you know, I would say, okay, take a piece of fabric and cut out the little space for the neck, and it could be anything, but I'm gonna pass this around, because when you look at this closely, you see it's got a design for the neck. So it was specifically made to, you can go ahead and pass that back if you want around, because it was specifically made to be a bib, and it's just a pretty piece of fabric as well. Here's something. No, we don't. Here's something that I think is just great fun, and somebody can tell me what language this is. Wait a minute, I have notes, I should probably use them. Because I'm trying to think. German, it's German, okay. Again, a lot of German, for whatever reason, I don't know. But, do you know what it says?
Come on, Grandma.
Where's Grandma? Grandma, do you know what it says?
Felipo Vasque?
Say what it says. It means clean your wash, it's for a wash basket. It's to put on top of a wash basket, and it means this is clean wash. You know, the clothes in this basket are clean. Clean wash. Clean wash. So if you had two wash baskets, one for dirty clothes and one for clean clothes, which probably would have happened back in the day. Then, that's right, then this is gonna lay over the basket, and it's telling you that these are clean clothes. Yes, fresh wash is basically what it's saying. Isn't that cool? I just think that's very cool. And it's beautifully finished, look at the back. Really nicely finished, and with red around it, with a red, this is an applique. The red is applique. And then I'm just going to show you a couple of other, well, a few other things, but we'll talk about some things. I found this someplace at a sale, and I just think this is beautifully done. Talk about beautiful embroidery. And somebody was just saying how, oh, you were saying way over there, how beautifully your mother and sister, her sister embroidered. This is beautifully embroidered. It's just gorgeous.
So is it for Christmas?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's Christmas. Yeah, it sure looks like it to me. Yeah, with the poinsettia. Yes, and you know, in embroidery, if you are a good embroiderer, your back is supposed to look as good as your front. And mine does not. I tried. This is pretty good. You know, you try to hide your tails, you try not to have it show through the front. But this is just beautifully done. It's just gorgeous work. I'll pass it around so that you can see. Because it really is card table size. A card table used to be square, and it used to be a little bigger than this. But I sort of can see it on something like that, you know, some kind of a table. So pass that, please. This is a fun quilt, and it is a summer spread because it has a ruffle. I'm coming around. It has a ruffle on it, and it's finished on the back. It's considered a summer spread on a bed for the summer. But the fun thing is, look at all the pictures of people. And these are presidents, presidents' wives, Native Americans, Wild Bill Hickok, and a few pictures from the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. There's just so many people in here, and so many things. The buildings are from the Pan American Exposition, and I'll show you a quilt with all the buildings. An eagle, but lots and lots of women, wives of presidents for the most part, But isn't it just really interesting how many embroidered designs there are? There are a zillion embroidered designs out there in the world, and there were. And these are old, and the nice thing is, they've labeled who these people are. So this is a great piece of history because you can actually see what they look like, and they've actually labeled them for you. And the blocks, it was still made in blocks. It was still basically penny squares. And then these blocks were sewn together and covered up with a sort of a zigzag feather stitch, just to cover up the seams. And that's a pretty way to do it too. But when you look at the back, do you see the seams? You can see the seams.
Yeah.
So it's just blocks that were sewn together, penny squares sewn together, and turned into a summer spread. And then sometimes people just made a quilt and did the feather stitching and didn't do all the fancy embroidery. So here we are. Here's a quilt, and there's quilting on here. It's if you look, if you can see through it, I can certainly see through it, and the batting, the quilt batting that's in the center of the quilt is just disintegrating. It's just going away. But there is quilting on this, and the quilting design is like a big flower. But they, do you see it? See the big flowers? And so they've done this feather stitch all around the edge when they put, so they still put blocks together and then they did the feather stitch. So what really is left here is the feather stitch. But the blocks were just quilted. They were never embroidered. They were always just quilted. It was just a way of making a quilted design a little bit fancier. And the blue, again, was popular because it held up color-wise. Now, I did show you the quilt from, oh, no, not yet. I'm still going to this. Designs. Designs were popular, and so this is sort of an interesting quilt. I love it because if you're a quilter, you're going to appreciate, and I guess I'll let Dan walk this in. You're going to appreciate the quilting on here. You see the gorgeous feathers? Oh, please. Yeah, see that? You know what you're doing. If you do that, that's great because that'll go a little bit faster. So, I know it. I've got more piles to go. We got to go faster here. So I'm going to send these around just so you can see what some of the designs are. Okay. So we'll start this over here. We've got different designs. We've got a variety of designs to show. Some are floral. The vase was probably a Japanese kind of, style, not quite Japanese, but inspired perhaps. Just take those and sort of send them around because I want to show you these sort of specific things. This is called the temperance drink. It's a horse drinking water. And the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was started in Chautauqua, did you know that? At the Chautauqua Institution. That was the first meeting of the Women's Christian Temperance Union in the 1870s. And so women wanted people to stop drinking. They wanted, they eventually did, pass a law that prohibited drinking. So this is a horse drinking in a trough, and it's called a temperance drink. And we did some patriotic things. So we have a patriotic flower with a flag. We have an eagle, patriotic eagle. I'm going to send these around when we're done looking at them this way. And we have the date 1914. And remember, what was 1914? Does anybody know what happened in 1914? World War I. Very good. And so that was a date to commemorate, you know, a sad date, but it was a date to commemorate. And then this is a morning star, and this is a 6-point star, so this is a Jewish star. And so we were commemorating all kinds of things. And so if you want to take a look at these more closely, Mary.
Come a little closer.
Oh, wow. And again, I've got another quilt with these blocks on it, but I just think it's sort of interesting, and this was probably made in the 1930s. But again, the blocks were around for so long. But look at these blocks. Now we're getting a little bit farther into time period. And in the 1930s, we had blocks that said Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday on them. And I know we have a mixed audience, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had underwear when I was growing up that said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so that became a popular thing to have these kinds of blocks. And there's Jumbo the elephant. You see him? He was a very popular figure back then. Jumbo was very popular. So that you'll find a lot of elephants or Jumbo even the elephant. But look, we've got cats and dogs, and so as we work our way up in time into the 1930s, we get more designs that were probably more familiar to people in general. And this is not totally Redwork. It's not at all Redwork, but it's embroidered. And I want you to see this because it's a sunbonnet suit. And there's a special reason for sunbonnet suit in the Buffalo area. So take a look at this. This is a quilt top that never got turned into a quilt. But it has embroidery on it, and you can see the little girls were called sunbonnet suits. And we had little boys called Overall Sam or Fishing Sam or whatever they called them. I don't have any little boys in the picture. But the interesting thing is that the first sunbonnet suit was designed by a man in Buffalo. And I've got to find my narration, so once in a while I have to look at my Bernhard, Bernhardt is his first name, Wall, designed the first sunbonnet suit. And there's a really neat book that's called The Meeting of the Sunbonnet Children, written by a woman who has as many different sunbonnet designs in here as you could possibly imagine, and there are the boys. But this book is filled with designs of the sunbonnet children. Just filled with designs of the sunbonnet children. And she did a lot of research. Betty Hagerman did a lot of research to find all the sunbonnet people. But the interesting thing is that Bernhard Wall was born in Buffalo, New York, December 30th, 1872. And he designed children who were wearing particular types of clothing. In 1893, he and a friend went to Philadelphia, and they started to, they served in the Spanish-American War, and then he started to design things he called sunbonnet babies. And he had his sunbonnet babies doing all kinds of different things. But that's the beginning of this whole sunbonnet craze. And his sunbonnet children were very specific. They had specific designs. They had hats. Thank you. They had hats that sort of looked like they could have been frontwards or backwards. They had the sort of the old kind of hats that maybe you would think of on a Conestoga wagon. That's how he designed his girls with the hats on them. But he just became very well known for his sunbonnet children, and it started that craze for the sunbonnet flocks, which were very popular. Okay. So I'm just going to show you, we're just going to go quickly and look at some things. Oh, because nursery rhymes started to become popular. Nursery rhymes become very popular. So what is this one? It's the cow jumped over the moon. You know. So blocks with all the nursery rhymes became very popular. And in fact, let me show this before this fell out. I'm going to find these. These are blue, but we're going to look at them anyway. Because nursery rhyme quilts became popular, and this happens to be a circus quilt. That became popular. Circus themes. So we started themes, and if you're trying to date a quilt that has embroidery on it or embroidered pictures, a good way to date it, because it's hard, embroidery looks the same. How do we know it was in 1900 or it was in 1930 or 40? As we get to the 30s and the 40s, we get more themed things. We have themes instead of just a picture of this and a picture of that. And then there was a woman named Ruby McKim, and Ruby McKim was very well known in the 1930s as someone who designed things for the newspapers. So, you know, you could learn how to make something through a newspaper pattern. And these were called quaddy quilties, Q-U-A-D-D-I-E, quaddy quilties for quilting. And she had, notice how squared off her designs are. Very popular. She did other things too, but was very popular to make them all sort of square. So here's another, and this is more themed again. We've got animals here, more circus animals. But again, you see how squared off these are? So these are quaddy quilties, more quaddy quilties. And Ruby Short McKim was very well known. She's now in the Quilters Hall of Fame for what she's done. And her family has decided to start selling her designs again. So her family has actually been selling her designs that you could do today. And I think someplace in here, yes, I have. So, in fact, we went in this one. So this is Quaddy Quilty Bedtime Quilt, available today to purchase online. And this is, I circled or squared off the pattern in orange. So this is this one. So we can pass that around together. That is, it's just interesting how things became popular and that's what happened. And I just think this is the sweetest thing. Look at these little cherubs. Doesn't this look like the Gerber baby? And maybe it is, I don't know. We don't know anything about it. The interesting thing is, and I just noticed it, I just got this fairly recently, I just noticed that there are stitches in here that have been pulled out. So this was quilted. Can you see it close up?
Oh, yeah, you can see it.
Yeah. And it's just the sweetest thing. But it does look like the Gerber baby, doesn't it? Who sadly just died.
I was just gonna say, they just had an article about her.
She just died. At what, age 90-something or 100?
The original Gerber baby?
Yes, the original Gerber baby just passed away. But isn't this just adorable? I just love this look. So I can see some stains. There are some stains. But the interesting thing is that this had been quilted And you can sort of see, can you see the quilting lines in it? You see the quilting lines that are gone?
Yeah, they're sort of like waves.
Yes, it was a wavy kind of quilting. They did like a wavy kind of quilting. Yeah. And then another theme that was popular was, the Pan American Exposition. So I have two quilts that you would probably enjoy seeing that are Pan American oriented and completely Pan American.
Is this the Buffalo?
So this is the Buffalo Pan American Exposition from 1901. And you can see the blocks. What they did for the Pan Am was sell 50 blocks. There were many, many different buildings. The Pan American Exposition was like another centennial, like the Centennial Exposition, where they had attractions, and they had different countries come and exhibit, and they had different buildings put up. And this is all where the Buffalo History Museum is today. The only building that's remaining is the building that was made for the Buffalo History Museum. That was made as a fixed building, and they intended it to be, that was the New York building at the time. They intended it to be permanent. The other buildings were all like plaster of Paris. They were just, just plaster. And they took them all down. So there were 50 different blocks that you could purchase all at once for 50 cents, a penny a piece. A penny a piece for the 50 blocks was 50 cents, and you could purchase the blocks and the red embroidery floss in order to make this. And now we're talking about quilts. So we started making quilts right around the Pan Am period. And also, of course, at the Pan American Exposition, President McKinley was shot, and that was a big, huge, of course, terrible event. And when you look at the blocks, you will usually see a picture of President McKinley, and you can help to date that by what this says. This says, President William McKinley, our martyred president. And there was a block for President McKinley before he was shot, because he was shot at the exposition, and that didn't say our martyred president. So you know that this quilt was made after he was killed. And most of the quilts that I see today have our martyred president on them. But there are blocks that were made without that written down. And so these were blocks that they sold after that. But this is interesting also, I think. Yeah, why don't you hold it for a minute? I think it's interesting because that was made in the early 1900s. And did you notice that that's machine quilted?
Machine quilted in the 1800s.
But machine quilting has been around for a long time, and we don't think about it. And the sewing machine was invented real early on, but in the 1840s it started to become popular. And it was popular because Singer gave us a way of purchasing a sewing machine on time so that people could afford it. But the interesting thing is I have seen quilts from the Civil War time period that were hand-pieced or hand-appliqued and machine quilted because people wanted people to know they had a fancy new sewing machine and they wanted it to show. So that happened. Another popular thing, and then this is again from Ruby McKim. This is a floral design. But another popular thing, and it's not Redwork, I know, but I thought you'd enjoy it, is crayon quilting. Am I right side up? Yes, I am. So Ruby McKim, again, her sort of squared off. This wasn't called squatty quilting, but look at the flowers again, sort of squared off. But this is crayon on fabric. And you can do that. It's a fun project, actually, to do crayon on fabric. And all you need to do is you can use regular crayons. You don't have to use fabric crayons. You can use regular crayons. You color the fabric, you color the design on the fabric, and then you put a piece of white, I just use white computer paper, and iron it. And what it does, you put the computer paper on top of the design, iron it. What it does is take the waxy part of the crayon off, and it just leaves the color. And it's pretty color fast. Now, if you wash it a lot, it's going to disappear. But this is a quilt top, so this has not been washed. But if you look at the designs, it's crayon. It's just plain old colored with crayon, and it's sort of a fun thing to do. And then, of course, this was put into blocks and made into a quilt. And we're going to look at this, which I think people have probably seen if you're a quilter. Have you seen the parasol lady quilt? And again, I'm going into embroidery. Notice how I worked my way out of redwork? Because I think embroidery is certainly a part of, it doesn't have to all be red. So we're going into embroidery here for a few minutes. But these are called parasol ladies, of course. Parasol ladies would make perfect sense. And they were applique. This is quilting, so it was done with applique. But you still see the embroidery, and the embroidery really makes a difference in how it looks. I'm trying not to walk on this. There's this little low spot there that I keep walking into. So, parasol ladies were embroidered to give them the dimension, parts of them were embroidered. Each of the blocks was done differently with a different fabric. And these were quite popular, and sort of had a resurgence in the 1980s. I found parasol ladies came back in about the 1980s. Another quaddy quilty. Again, I have so many of these because I think it's fascinating. I just think
it looks like an Etch-a-Sketch almost.
You're right, it does, doesn't it?
Or early
It's a
web
real
design.
well, maybe that's how she did it, But I think they're fascinating. So this is another quaddy quilty pattern that is an early pattern. She was very popular in the 20s and the 30s. And I believe this is from that time period. This is a heavy quilt. It's not a contemporary quilt. This is fairly old. But I just think the designs are pretty interesting. So again, that square off design is just sort of interesting, They're all And just to let you know, this is more contemporary. This has some issues, but as we went farther and farther in time, we come closer and closer in time to our time period. Now we're making quilts with blocks where we've just got one block, and not the variety. We've just done a bird, and we've done it over and over and over again. And this is 1930s era. The glue is like a satin, it's a sateen, cotton sateen. It sort of has that satiny look to it, but it's cotton sateen. And this is sort of interesting because if you look at the bottom corners and the top corners, do you see where the corners are cut out? Yeah. So this is small. It surprises me because usually that was for a poster bed. A bed with 4 posts, so this would be cut out to allow for the posts. But this probably was a baby quilt post, or a baby quilt for a poster bed, because it's pretty small.
For a toddler's bed.
Yes, a toddler's bed, exactly. Yes. And then again, this is in black, but it's not black one. This is in black, and it's a Bible quilt. Interesting, because these are basically verses from the Bible. So if you know your Bible verses very well, you will be able to tell what each one of these represents.
Pastor Jan, you're up.
I mean, I can tell you Noah's Ark, et cetera, et cetera. So this is done in black embroidery floss. And this is done basically in that Kensington stitch or in that stem stitch. But look at the back, she's done a really nice job. And I'm saying she, it could be a man, I know it could be a man, but it's very nicely done on the back. Very nicely done. And then I brought a few things just to show you what we have in this time period. And this is just a cute little vest. And there's a brick in it that is a copy of Redwork. And that was out a few years ago. We have this a few years ago. So this fun little vest in red and white has this interior fabric. And in fact, I used the very same fabric when I made this. So I made my version, a contemporary version of a Redwork quilt. So I used some of the old Redwork patterns, but then I made it contemporary by putting patchwork with it, and so I monkey wrench blocks with it. And on the back, I used that same Redwork fabric that was very popular.
I noticed that.
So this is just what you can do for embroidered blocks. You don't have to embroider an entire quilt's worth of blocks, you know. 4 embroidered blocks, and then some patchwork, which I enjoy doing, and putting it together into a small wall quilt makes a really nice wall quilt. So that was a fun thing to do. And I've got a couple more things that I did, and then I'll show you what is available. This is a quilt that I made from grandmother's flower garden style pieces. These are hexagons, and usually we make something we call a grandmother's flower garden block with it, which I did, but I used red and cream for my background. And then I had this quilted by a friend, and look at how she quilted it. Do you see that she's done basically Redwork quilting? And if you look at the back, you can probably tell better. So she's used red throughout, but you can't see the red on my blocks, but you can see the red in the background that she mimicked the blocks. So I think that was a fun way to do this. So this is probably the most contemporary Redwork that we would probably see today. So I made this just 3-4 years ago, and it's Redwork by machine embroidery, really. When you look at it, it's machine embroidered Redwork. And actually, the blocks are, I pieced them with paper piecing, which is, some of you understand, is where you take a piece of paper and you fold the fabric around the paper and then put it together into this form. But usually you do it all by hand, and when I finished putting the paper around these pieces, I put them together and zigzagged on my sewing machine, and then I appliqued them on the back by zigzagging around the outside edge. So I made this very contemporary by doing it that way as opposed to doing it all by hand.
You took the paper out, though.
Oh, I did take the paper out.
I was wondering about
You
that.
need to take the paper out. Although, you know, we have seen in English paper piecing, we have seen old quilts with the paper still in them, which we love to see because it tells you what time period we're talking about. And we see little bits of paper in there too. So yeah, it really is fun.
Newspaper with it.
It was often newspapers. Sometimes it was letters. But Brian would appreciate that it was often newspaper. But sometimes it was letters, you know, whatever they could use. Actually. This is a little sewing kit that I made from a pattern from this book, actually. So there are things out there. Now, it wasn't meant to be as Redwork. It was meant to be embroidered with a lot of different colors. But I just thought it was the funnest thing ever. So here's my sewing kit, small, closed up. And then when you open it, you've got the design. And then the inside holds scissors and there's a couple of spaces. Really, isn't it fun?
Very.
Yeah, really fun. So there's your whole design. And then there's the inside. It was a fun thing to do. It just really was an enjoyable thing to do. So there's your design. And see, when you fold it up, it still looks good. You know, isn't that cute? It is. It's really fun. And I love the scissors holder part. So there's your inside, and there's your outside. And then when you fold it up, it still looks good. And I used Velcro and a button. I didn't use a button and a button. And then just to let you know, there are fabrics out there in the world that you can use. This is a whole quilt. And all you'd have to do is embroider, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, because you did it. What's your name? Your name? Gert. Gert made one of these, she said, and used this pattern, but a bigger, a whole quilt sized. But it's a really nice idea. They give you this, and you could pretend that it was already done, but much nicer to actually embroider on top of it, right? Yes. And so we have other things like this that are supposed to look like the older fabrics. This probably could be something like a pillowcase, I suppose. Or a splasher, yes. But see there, and this again is, you can buy this as yardage, so you can get it as big as you want it to be. And once again, this would be fun to actually embroider, do the embroidery. The pattern is right there for you. And the nice thing is, because it's in red, if you missed, nobody would notice, right? And we also have these kinds of things in blue. And look at all the old patterns. I mean, these are, you now, having seen so many quilts that I've just picked up and shown you, do you see how many repeats of designs there are? If I sat down and put all these quilts next to each other, I could probably find 5 or 6 of the same design in every single thing we've seen. They just were very popular. And yet, we've seen so many different ones, And then here's a piece of yardage also. So this could be used, this would be a fun backing for a quilt, or, I hate to waste it on the back, right? But I don't think you want to hand embroider those back.
It might be pretty for a border.
It would be pretty for a border, wouldn't it? Yes. Yeah, that's a good idea. It would be a very pretty border. Yes, it would. But I just want you to see what's out there. So you can do all kinds of things with Redwork. It definitely doesn't have to be anything specific. There's also, and I don't know if these are still available, months of the year, and again, months of the year, days of the week, all of these things were popular. And this is a pattern that I purchased several years ago, but here's the original block from, the 1900s again. So she is actually on this pattern, and the woman who designed these patterns has since passed away, but she took old quilt blocks and just designed, copied them and used them again. And here are a couple of other things. These are machine done. Now this one isn't, but this is just hand. No, I think it is machine done. I think the white is not. No, maybe it is. Anyway, I think it's machine done. This I know is machine done. So there are machine embroidery patterns out there. If you have an embroidery machine, there are all these patterns out there that you can use to, you know, replicate without having to do all that handwork. So something to think about if you want to go fast. And remember I showed you the presidents. Well, I don't have the more recent presidents, but look who we have. So they're still making presidents' quilt designs. And I'm sure our more recent presidents are probably there too. I don't have them. But every president has been turned into a Redwork pattern. They're out there in the world. So you can go all the way from George Washington right up through today to, you know, Joe Biden. I'm sure there's one for him. And I would like to give you just a little bit to remember this by. Where did I put it, dear? Do you know? Oh, thank you. Oh, forgot. A Redwork CD. If anybody can still play a CD. I've had it for a while. But this is a Redwork CD. I can still play a CD on my computer. So I would like to pass these out. Everybody take one. It's just a pattern, just one pattern of Redwork. But what I did was simply take a quilt that I own and put it on the copy machine and copied it. That's all I did. And you're going to tell that because you see the gray areas. That's the thread showing through to the top of the quilt, and I whited out quite a bit of the red thread that was sticking through, you know, coming through.
Yeah, that
But
light
anyway,
that shines is pretty bright.
Yeah. Yeah, so take those and pass them out, sort of put them in the middle here too, at the end. There should be plenty here. You could, how are you going to transfer it onto a fabric? Well, there are ways. One way, take one and pass them. One way would simply to be, and if it's this kind of fabric, this thinner, you know, off-white muslin type of fabric, you just lay your fabric on top and trace it with a pencil. Just trace it with a pencil. Also, if you're familiar, years ago, we used to have these red pencils that you could trace something with the red pencil and then put the fabric on top and iron it, and the red transferred to the iron. That was another way of transferring it. Another way of doing it, and this again, although they're out there, years ago, if you were a sewer, you had a tracing wheel. Remember when you used a tracing wheel that perforated? You could still do that with this, and you could trace around the pattern with the perforated wheel. And I'd make a copy just in case I messed up. But you could trace around the pattern with the perforated wheel. And then if you wanted it on something dark, the ideal is to pounce. We pounce something. Sometimes they talk about pouncing chalk. What I have done is actually taken cornstarch. And I have used a tracing wheel and I've perforated the pattern. And then I pounced cornstarch through it. And now it won't last, but then you can take like a white pencil or something and trace around the design that you made with the cornstarch. And another way to do that, instead of a tracing wheel, which probably we don't have anymore, is to put the pattern in your sewing machine with a fairly thick needle and no anything underneath it and no thread. And so you just put the pattern in the sewing machine and start stitching around the design. You just stitch around the design with the needle. And if you have a fairly thick needle, it gives you big enough holes that then you can pounce something through it. And years ago, they suggested, and I am not suggesting this, they suggested using cinnamon, which I don't think you should use, and cocoa, which you definitely don't want to use because it's going to stain your hair. But that was suggested years ago to use as a pouncing thing. But they actually have chalk. There's chalk out there in a little pouncing thing that you can use if you really wanted to get into this. And I'm not going into it, but there were many, many ways of getting the design onto the pattern in the early, 1900s, late 1800s. And it actually became a woman's cottage industry. So the backs of women's magazines, like Ladies' Home Journal, that's been around forever, the back of the magazine would have an ad for a woman to buy a kit. You could purchase a kit on making these and then selling them to your friends, right? And it sort of sounded like a Ponzi scheme to me because you would get your friends to come then and get things from the magazine, and then you could sell them to your friends, and then your friends could sell them to their friends, and they could sell them to their friends, and what does that sound like? But they had these in the late 1800s. The women were doing this as a cottage industry to make some money. So there were many, many ways of getting that pattern transferred onto another, some of which were really, really terrible ways. There were dangerous ways. They suggested if you made a mistake, you could use kerosene to clean it off. So sort of scary. But anyway, that is really what I want to say, except I have a little poem that I could read you, but of course I've hidden it. I think I did it in here. No, I didn't get it in here. Honey, I need you. Where did my little bunch of stuff go that I was looking at? This. Yeah, you always know where my stuff is.
I'm the CEO. Like a
He's my CEO. He carries everything out. Okay. I think it's here. It is here. It is for the sequence. I just have. Sorry, people. I'm somewhat disorganized at the end, but I know this is where I had the others. I don't know. So this lovely little poem that I wanted to say, but recently I don't have it. We might not. I guess we're not. Oh, wait. Oh, we're good. Okay. I just wanted to give you a little ending, and it isn't about Redwork, sadly. I couldn't find a Redwork poem. But what I did find was a poem that my mom wrote to me in 1978 on my birthday. So I thought this would be fun. A patch of grandma's apron, or maybe mother's dress, a little piece of calico or silk. Each has a special meaning, a special loving thought, and sewn together form a lovely quilt. Many tiny stitches, all made by loving hands, be a gift for someone very dear, to serve as a reminder of happy times gone by, a souvenir to keep year after year. Questions. I am happy to answer questions. I know we're 15 minutes past the time we're supposed to be, and you have a quilt to show us. Yes, let me see.
I don't know anything about it, but if you'd like to.
I would love to.
I know it's kind of tattered and torn, and I don't even know where it came from. I've had it for a long time.
Oh, and it is lovely Redwork, and look at that. I mean, these are so familiar patterns. Oh, and here's, see, look at this. Isn't this lovely? But the one thing that's catching my eye right now is the camel. Do you see the camel? That was a very popular thing back, again, this is probably early 1900s, because exotic animals, camels and elephants were exotic animals. And monkeys, let's not mention the monkeys today, but monkeys were also considered. And here's a lovely woman woman's face. This is another lovely pattern. And here's the little girl. Sometimes this little girl was rolling a hoop or doing something else. So this is an older pattern. Look at how small. Look at that pattern. Do you see? The type and fact, that looks a lot more like that Bernard Wall little sunbonnet Sue bonnet. Those were more like the bonnets that he designed. Remember I said they sort of look the same on both ends. It's similar. So I'm dragging it, sorry. A cow is not exotic, but was popular. Farm animals were popular. Birds were popular. And we've got farm animals, we've got birds. We've got, the lovely, probably baby shoes. Look at those shoes. I love that. That's great. These are some lovely examples. And yes, it has a few tattered spots. And I don't know if you want to do anything with it. The one thing that you can do to just keep it from getting worse, and do you see we have a pretty big spot here. You can use bridal veil tooling. And you can just cut a square and applique, just hand stitch on top of this. And what it'll do is keep that from going further, at least it's going to contain everything in there. So very often if you just want to, you're not repairing, you're just preserving. But a piece of bridal veil tooling on that hole, and I would cover the whole block, would be easier. And just in and out with a running stitch. Would work, I think, quite nicely. That's a great quilt. Thank you. Anybody else have stuff to show us?
I have something I wanted to say about that. I went to a museum in Nebraska several years ago. It was like a pioneer heritage type museum. And they had a quilt hanging that looked very similar like that, with those kind of no theme to it, just a random, and it was the Redwork with all the red strips and everything, and went over to admire it, and the little plaque said gifted by, and it was the name of a woman and the year, from Silver Creek, New York.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I thought, here I am in Nebraska.
Oh my goodness. Isn't that interesting?
It was fascinating.
Well, actually, a few years ago, we had a quilt gifted to this museum from somebody in Texas. So you just, she had a beautiful crazy quilt and wanted to give it back to its home, which was really nice. So she brought it back here. So people do things like that. And because it's random and we don't see themes and we don't see the little girls with their days of week and months, it's the earlier time period. You can pretty much tell. Plus also the fact that the fabrics are pretty flimsy. Before World War I, we had rather flimsy fabric, and right around World War I, our fabrics were very poor quality. Partly because of the war, I suppose, but partly because we had problems with Germany, and German fabric was better quality than ours at the time. So that's one indication of the age of it. I can't promise, but it pretty much reads around 1900 to 1920 to me. Sometime around there.
I do a lot of teaching of quilting, and the one thing I want to stress is if and when you make a quilt today, label it.
Yes,
Put your name, address, and the date on it.
Yes, do you see all the labels on these quilts? Do you see any labels on these quilts? None. And part of the problem was that people didn't value them as a work of art, or it was something grandma made, and we just used it on the bed. I mean, honestly, nobody really valued them the way that we do today. So thank you for saying that. Yes, please label your quilts, and label them so that that's going to be permanently not in the middle of the front. Sometimes I just actually purchased a quilt that's an adorable, beautiful little quilt, and the woman did a beautiful job of applique. They were sunbonnet Sues Beautiful job of applique, beautiful job of embroidery, wonderful. I gave it to a new little baby because I thought the parents would enjoy it. But on the back, in black magic marker, she put her name and the date, which was very nice, 1991. It wasn't like 100 years ago. And then she put, "Do not bleach." That was good. But I covered it up with a pretty label because it was black magic marker. So do label it carefully. But it is a good idea to put who made the quilt, when it was made, where it was made. And I wouldn't just say Machias, or I wouldn't just say Cattaraugus without saying New York, you know. You want to put where it was made. Do you know how many buffaloes there are? I live in Lockport. Do you know how many Lockports there are? So don't just put your city or your state, or, well, the state is helpful, but put that kind of information. And really, from now on, I believe those of us who are making quilts now do value our work and do want our children and grandchildren to understand that this is where it came from. So from now on, it won't be so hard. And I had been a quilt appraiser. I've since retired from that part, but in appraising quilts, it is such a mystery sometimes as to when was this made and where was it made, and appraisers now who are going to start out now are going to have an easy life because they're going to know where
And when that was made.
Yeah, honestly. So thank you. Anybody else want to? Yes.
You were saying there's a difference between black work and red work. Can you elaborate?
I can't because I don't remember the difference, but I know black work is a type of embroidery work. It's actually a type. We'll have to look that up.
I can Google it.
But yeah, Google it. Go ahead and Google it. No, seriously.
You look like a Google person.
I can Google it right now if you want to know. I can. No, I used to know, and I haven't paid any attention in a long time, and I don't remember the differences, but it's like a type of embroidery, not just that you're using black thread, but it's a type of embroidery. It isn't the same as just general embroidery, and this is as much as I can give you, but we can all Google it.
I'll Google it.
Thank you. Anybody else? And did Gertrude, do you want to show those cute little blocks you had? You still have them? She has blocks that her mother and her mother's sister made when they were children. So they're tiny little blocks with some fun little stitching. Thank you. Yeah. Look, so this is children's work. And actually we noticed that this one on the bottom looks much better than the others, doesn't it? So maybe she was getting better. But this is pretty darn well made, I think. I think it's really nice. And then to put it together this way into a little child's quilt, maybe doll quilt probably, I think that's a great idea. So boys, when you have to make your blocks now, you can put this together. It is actually, it's a fun thing to do. It really is a fun thing to do, no matter who you are, boy, girl, or whatever.